ARTYli Gallery on Human Rights Day. And I think Human Rights Day, one of the words that really comes to mind for me is empathy with each other and empathy with the world around us. We'd like to invite you to the Rewilding exhibition today. There's some fabulous work on the show, I'm sure you'd agree, and some wonderful artists in the panel, which is Kiana Ayenge, Pumzile Buthelezi, John Moore. And obviously we all know Ashraf Jamal. Ashraf, we'd like to welcome you back. It's a couple of months since you've done an opening for us, but we're excited to have you back. And I'm going to hand over to you, Ashraf.
Hello everyone, I'm here as a facilitator with the great privilege to have three of the contributing artists to the space, and we'll be listening to what they have to say, and I'll be very keen to make sure that you speak to the artist afterwards as well and dig up any further gems. So in the middle we have the matriarch Pumzile Buthelezi and her beautiful daughter over there with the seriously orange hair. Can't be missed. Okay, and we have the very young Kiana Ayenge. I think you just graduated from UJ, is that correct? Yes. Okay, we'll find out about that. And then we have, right next to me, we have John Moore. Now, before speaking to the artists and listen to what they have to say, I just wanted to pick up on the idea of rewilding very briefly. And first to pick up on what Cullen had pointed out, that this is Human Rights Day. And humanity is at the epicenter of rewilding, but not a humanity that is centered simply on us, a humanity that understands itself as an extension of the entire ecology, all species that make up the chain of being. So there's a much more holistic vision of life. If you think, for example, of the famous Vitruvian man, you know, the man standing out there in the big circle. Okay, that is a massively egocentric vision of humankind. Rewilding and the new vision, which is tied to empathy, is a different idea of what makes us human. What makes us human is empathy, true. What makes us human is our ability to connect, not only to other humans, but to the worlds which we inhabit, but which also inhabit us. So instead of thinking of ourselves as separate from the world we live in, it's the connectedness of everything that frisson one experiences when looking at a blossom, when gazing at a stranger, when helping somebody across a road, whatever it is. It's these human tendernesses that we are trying to actually embrace. Now, rewilding is about that, but the important thing is that it's an ecological drive, but it's also a socio-political drive, an economic drive, a historical drive, and a humanitarian drive. In addition to it, what we're going to see over here is how rewilding actually factors into new visions of creativity. Now, when I wrote this text for ARTYli, I wrote the following, that ARTYli enters a new stage in its creative enterprise. If the show Rewilding is seminal, it's because it expands the frontier of creativity. And what we're going to ask ourselves, does that mean? It means one's ability to make art not as an objectified thing, or as a representation of the natural world, but as something that is eminently connected to other things in a world that is profoundly relational. Relationality is the buzzword. It's about connectivity. As the famous British novelist in Howard's End said, and this is Ian Forster, only connect the poetry and the prose, and we shall be exalted. That idea of exaltation is tied to taking what is prosaic, what is ordinary, with what is magical and wondrous, and in that connection, finding a way to express the truth of whom and what you are, and whom and what we are. Now, There's a gentleman called Kenneth Brenneman, who in his book, Subversive Acts of Humanity, a survival guide for choosing evolution over self-destruction, he writes, imagine a world where humans are completely captive. Over time, people lose their creativity, vitality, and sense of freedom. Now, imagine the opposite, a world where humans are free to roam in nature, create with their hands, and connect with their surroundings. It's the second impulse that we need to emphasize. But we cannot ignore the fact that we remain imprisoned. So therefore, when he talks about the fact that we are losing our creativity, losing our vitality, losing our sense of freedom, Brenneman is speaking about a very real social, political crisis, where we are being divested of our personal agency, our personal truths, our personal will, our personal drives. And this is where artists always historically stand at the frontier. Because artists are the ones who cut the sway, who open up the space, who take the risks, who ask us to actually embrace more fully the difficulties of our time, but also the wonders of our time. If you look here, for example, in our very midst, are works by John Moore, works by Phumzile Buthelezi, over there, and works by Kiyo Nyembe, over here. What we're going to do is find out what made these artists make the works they make. So we're going to start now with Phumzile. What struck me when I was doing some research on your work, it was the use, as I understood it, the inseparability of the plant world and the human world is the one that struck me very deeply. So that the idea of the cultural and the organic are deeply connected. And when I was taken to have a look at those particularly striking collages, because we don't look at them or think of them as collages, because collages tend to be about the data of the everyday thrust together in new odd combinations to create some kind of unease and to jolt one. But what you're doing is creating a sort of a certain kind of excitement in the interlinkages of disparate matter, but they fuse in such beautiful ways. Why is that the way in which you decided to do the things you want to do?
It's a very difficult one to answer, to say why or how. I think after a certain time, you realize that you put so much control in everything that you do, and you don't leave that room for growth. Okay, you don't leave the room for growth. And at some point in my studio, I was like, I want this spontaneity of it. I want things to just happen that will surprise me. And I had to search for ways to do that. And I realized that I think one of the biggest things is, for example, in my head, is if I was in class, a teacher would say, okay, remember, if you have to do, you have to show the light, the direction of the light, which way it's coming from. See, that automatically, it tuned me into seeing things that way, right? And that also pushed me to try and control my work to be that way. But I didn't want that. I wanted to lose the control. I wanted to be the vessel, a magician, if I should be a magician as well. But I wanted to whip up magic, but I should not control it. So somehow I found the balance. I don't know how I found it because it appears differently throughout my work.
Right. Well, that's a very beautiful way to articulate it, because what Phumzile, as I understand it, is talking about is the idea of a benign accident, the idea of a certain kind of an energetic force that travels through the hand, through the body, in the making of something, rather than intention or ideology or purpose. There's no overriding argument. So if you think about the kinds of influences, there's no obvious, because your work is actually incredibly delicate, very sensuous. But at the same time, what you're describing is very much an expressive form of articulation. You know, and that you think about expressionism in terms of, you know, the famous movements in New York in the 1940s and 50s. But what you're doing is different because what you're doing is something somehow softer, more gentle. And it's got to do, yes, with the color palette. But I think for me, what is remarkable is not only the color palette, it's the choice of the materials. It's not apparent what they are. You know, you've got to look closely. So please, after this talk, look very closely at these works, and you'll see very surprising aspects in them which are not immediately a part of the work. Now, I think it was Karen who said this, to pick up on your argument. I think it was you, or a quote which I found in your text. Rewilding asks what becomes possible when we loosen our grip. When we loosen our grip on land, on bodies, on narratives, on time itself. This idea of time itself, because when we listen to Priscilla, she's somehow caught in this moment. She's not somehow looking back and reflecting and looking at what she's making, just inside the moment. So she loses a sense of time. Things become outside of time, untimely. They somehow snap what we think of as causality, beginning, middle, and end. That narrative time is not the time in which this artist enters. Her vision of land, because of course she's dealing with plant land, which of course is the intensive sort of phenomenon, in many ways, the grace of the earth, the blessing of the earth. One thinks of flowers in the floral world, or the plant world as having that quality. Here I think the whole work is entirely different, but think about it. Georgia O'Keeffe was a painter of flowers. That's one of the most important things that she painted. And what was she painting? She was not painting representations of flowers. She was painting the emotional spaces that she connected with in the moment encounter with the vegetable world. When we do that, we see ourselves in that zone because we don't see things from a distance. We pretend we do. Our rational minds claim we do, and that we dominate the world. But no, we are in the middle of it all. So that immanence is what is central to Butlese's art. I'd like to shift here for a moment, we'll get back. I'd like to shift to Kiona Niembe, because I placed them together in terms of, and they're very beautifully juxtaposed over here. I placed them together in analyzing how the plant world and the human world fuse. Now, Kiona Niembe, her works are monotypes, which I want you to explain. I'm not very good at technical stuff. Also, this is going to happen with John, and we explain stuff I know absolutely nothing about. But, so the thing is, what I was intrigued by, she says her monotypes she describes as metamorphic landscapes. So a landscape is not a thing appraised at a distance. It's not simply a picturesque phenomenon seen from a certain perspective. It is a metamorphic moment. So can we start there? Because it's somehow connected. That's what put you two together, because like metamorphosis is very much also going on in your work. So, Kiona, could you please explain to me what's going on? Apart from what I do see, which is beauty, what the hell is going on?
Hi everyone, hope you're doing well today. So, I guess my curiosity with nature begins in sitting with it. And what I mean by that is, like, I think there's a lot you can take in from the beauty of being in a park or a garden. But there's this moment that I recognize happens in the in-between, where it's almost like an eerie feeling with nature. And in that space, I almost feel like, well, then this plant, this tree has to be more than what it is. You know, it has to have a spirit of some kind. And I wanted to lean in on that and kind of create almost like a speculative world where nature kind of reclaims itself in almost like a way of taking back that it is more than nature, more than human, and we do not dominate it, and kind of like suggest our own ideas of what it can be. That's why I wanted to explore that kind of space, yeah.
But what's with the nature? I mean, you know, we think of nature, we think of the 19th century, we think of the great poets like Wordsworth, for example. Nature was a big thing in the Romantic movement, in literature and in painting. There's a return in these two artists' work to the natural realm. Why are you sick to death of human beings? Trying to find a little peace? What's going on? What's going on? Phumzile, what's going on? Please tell us, confess.
Well, like I said, I think you realize the power that you have as a person, right? And that power could be building or destroying. You could make something so beautiful like realism. You could draw something very well. And you just realize that the more you keep going, trying to perfect it, the more you're just not getting to where you want to get to. And you realize that at some point, the more you continue, you might actually mess it up. Because you might now start thinking of certain ideas. And then your aim when you started was to achieve this goal, but now you're actually not even getting there. So I think it's a matter of you as a person having that introspection and finding answers. And also seeing other people's work. You know, you see something that it's as if this person just, you know, put on some magic on that and they didn't really do it themselves. Just like the monotype that you're talking about, it's like that one moment thing. You cannot duplicate it again. Once you've gone it the first time and printed it, you cannot do it again, except maybe to try and copy the same thing. So wanting not to copy and wanting the work to actually be individual and to stand on its own, you now have to, you know, find that little satisfaction with yourself. And if you don't find it, you have to go back to the drawing board and ask yourself, how can you get to that space? Where are you trying to go? So I think for me, that's what is happening. I mean, I know I get to be surrounded with a lot of material, and it's just for me to just decide on the starting point. And after that, I have to always continue to remind myself that let this happen. Let it happen on its own. Let the work come out. Do not control. So,
Can I add something?
Yes.
And what I love about how myself and Phumzile's work kind of conversate is the fact that we all know what nature looks like. We're around it every day. But I think what we're able to do is take the idea of what you know as nature and kind of play with it, kind of play with your imagination. Let your imagination come almost expand to what you think a tree is, to what more possibilities it could be, I think, yeah.
Listen to the two of you, and there was one little trigger, and John Moore and I looked at each other smiling, because we're going to pick up on Phumzile's argument about the uniqueness, and then how do you redouble, how do you duplicate something, is it possible, is there always an error as you transcribe from one thing to the next? That's the one thing I wanted to, but before turning to John, I'm just reminded of the beloved, well for me beloved, American playwright Sam Shepard, who said, destinations from some place to someplace, but in the middle is where the action is. So there's that imminence, which is really what's going on, particularly in the practice of Phumzile. The reason I'm saying that is because that imminence is most striking, that immediacy is most striking in her work. Whereas, and this is a speculative, Kiana, when I look at your work, I don't see the same level of imminence because I feel a quality of distance, an ability to appraise the world, to measure it, to moderate it to some degree. There's an awareness of mediation as a condition in the making. Whereas Phumzile's highly romantic vision, I might as well call it Delacroix. You know, it's basically a very highly romantic vision. I'm just going to immerse myself in the drama of the moment. You know, the musculature of the passion is all that's going to be revealed. But there's a level of more considered energy in Kiana's work, and it's probably got to do a bit more. I'd like to talk about the monotype, just the technical side of how you made these works.
So my process is working, I'm a printmaker, so it's a studio-based, you work on like a perspex sheet. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, it's like a plastic sheet. And you work with oil paints or even watercolors and kind of make your image. And then once it's dried, you take it to the press. The press is where you kind of transfer the image on the perspex to paper. So after it's transferred, it's quite also a spontaneous, audacious act, I would say, because it goes from me drawing from reference what I see around me, what I've seen around me in landscapes, to this final image, which I feel like loses and gains components that I had no part of, and which is so fun when the completion of the print is revealed, like when it's time to unveil it. It's almost like I'm surprised as well, which is quite fascinating for me because it becomes a whole new image that I get to go back and work out what it's trying to say or what it is. Yeah, so it's quite fun. I feel like it's a very engaging process. I'd like to call it's very experimental, in my opinion. And I wanted to say that because printmaking can be quite a precise, structured format way of making, and I wanted to break those as nature does. Yeah.
There's one thing about printmaking which I can't wrap my brain around. You do the shit, right? But everything comes out in reverse. I mean, my brain can't think like that. Who thinks like that? I mean, how? What's wrong with you?
You know what the most complicated thing is, and which I'm hoping you'll see in my future work, is doing a very long work. That it stops at some point, then you have to, with the proper registration, make sure that when you continue the next part, it connects. It looks like one image, which is something that messes my brain up. Yeah.
That's Zen, man. We're going to shift. We're going to shift now to John Mon, who deals with describes himself as.
I'm a printmaker, but also work with pastels. But I just want to talk quickly about the operating system. Artists are people who have the skill to create ideas that we have had from visionary perspective, something that's from the ether, that we literally become conduits. And each one of us as artists try and create that genius that we see into the real world. And I think you said that you can't repeat. I would beg to differ. I think when artists are in the genius mode, and please understand, when an artist is in their studio, don't cross the threshold, because that threshold is sacred. And when that process of creation is happening, we literally are gods, in the sense that we only have a perspective, and it is demanding of our time to create that reality into this world. And I feel that as an artist, that is our duty, is to do the absolute best to create this idea into this reality. I look at my work as portals, where we reach different realities, where we have the three-dimensional world, and then we have the plane of transcendence, which is the plane that you see, and then behind my work is the spiritual realm, or the realm where we can decipher the genius, or decipher the genius. So I strive very hard to create print and printmaking like the masters. The etchings that are on display, and all my etchings, like the giraffe, are techniques that was invented by Rembrandt, and I actually use the same plates and the same acids that he invented. And it's very important to me to go back to the basics, back to the masters. So when you create an idea, obviously as an artist we strive for the best. And if I can get that into print form, that genius can be printed multiple times. So the genius is captured and can be transferred. So, but yeah, that's my a perspective that I have.
Well, thank you very much, John, for what is in many ways one of the great archetypal visions of the artist genius. That the work, while it can be replicated, it remains and retains its uniqueness. So there's an indelible signature in this case, the signature of John Moore. And yet, that signature is repeated, as we do ourselves. And yet it's an indelible signature that is ours. So it's that sense of the work being embodied in and through the artist, which becomes the vital understanding of how an artwork is made. It is embodied. Which brings us now to the curious statement I made earlier on. What then does it mean if John is speaking about an embodied force, a genius that's located in a singular being, but it's tied very much to lineage, to history, to echo? How then do you link that very transcendental, sublime, and essential vision of art to the formulation of needing now to loosen our grip on land, on bodies, on narratives? How, for example, do you connect that?
So, I've always been very affiliated with nature and the environment. And as a white South African artist, I try and merge my European inheritance into my African roots. So I've been very fortunate enough to travel around the world, and I've been to Glastonbury and all these incredibly sacred places. But I always find that I have to find my way back home, which is Africa. Africa is where I find my energy and my creativity. So if I was to move to America or Australia, it would be very difficult for me, because we have, and my language is not language of form, it is language of animals. And I always look at being a spokesperson for nature. So at a very young age, I was introduced to the San in Namibia. And they told me a very interesting story, and it's something that I have a key philosophy in my work. In their creation, they were able to communicate with nature and talk to all the animals. When they came out of a baobab tree, they clapped and danced, and as they clapped and danced, all the animals came out of the tree. And in a very specific moment in time, all the animals didn't kill, didn't eat. They were all speaking the same language. And until, unfortunately, one of the San killed an antelope, and then the world fragmented. And I always look at my work as being pre-fragmentation, where if you look at my work, it's all about being able to communicate and being able to resonate with the animals. You must have all had experience in nature where in the city it's very hard, life goes and it's very quick, it's relatively fragmented. But when you step out into nature, one tends to be more relaxed. You look at the sunset, you start to ground and you start to interact with nature. And my work tries to look at that sacred connection that we as humans have, because with all due respect, the San believe that the humans we are protectors of the planet. That's actually what our role is. And what we have done as a society is at times, it's been very challenging for me, because I see the extermination of species and I try and honor who and what they are, and look at my work as very positive, to see that if you sit, with your best drink at a sunset with the sun sitting on a mountaintop, that sense of resonance can only come from nature. You can look at it in a building, but you're connecting to nature in some way. That's the real world. This world that humans have created is actually fake. And I look at my reality, my world, as trying to honor that sacred connection of humans and divine, which are the animals. So it's been very challenging for me to see how the world is changing. And there are some places of genius, and I'm trusting that the earth and humans can see my work and change their reality and perspective into becoming a better being. And I look at my work as altarpieces. They're supposedly places where you can go to and look and go over and over and over at the detail, because the detail is very important to me. I don't want you to look and just move on. I want you to look and come back to it and come back to it, and then all of a sudden you have an altered state of awareness. And that only happens when you actually connect to the work or you connect to yourself. And you have to get the world out and focus on the image, in my perspective.
A very, very well articulated perspective, John. If I were to understand it correctly, there's a certain idealism, a certain nobility, a certain purity, a certain energetic quality to John's vision of what he understands himself to be doing. He's interested in the sacred, he's interested in the sanctity of nature, he's interested in our connection to that sanctity and how that can regenerate us and make us better human beings. It's interesting because what he says seems to run strikingly differently to the following formulation by Julian Baggini in his book, How the World Thinks. He says, we are as close to nature when we use computers as we are when we walk along the coast, because nature is as much in silicon and steel as it is in sand and sea. The reason I'm raising this issue is not in any way to contest the fundamental vision which John Moore has given us, which is a vision refined in the great work on nature by Ralph Waldo Emerson, a work that's connected very much to the American transcendentalist movement, which needs to come back urgently, because in this debased, dehumanized world in which we're living, this world is purely contractual, this world is so utterly arbitrary, in which there is a zero capacity for feeling. I fully understand the position that John embodies, but at the same time, the paradox is that we are urban and we're a part of nature. To wish one away at the expense of another, for me, it's not an error, it's a choice. But for me, it's an inexplicable, and inescapable combine. The natural world and the synthetic world are connected. Our blood has plastics in it. Sorry, we know that. But the point is, we are caught up in this realm. So, what's interesting then, I want to know about the technical side of what you're making. And isn't that quality that is also synthetic? I don't know.
Well, the technical qualities, I try not to compromise on technique and use, as I said before, use the same techniques as Rembrandt. But, you know, my work is hours and hours and hours. Like you ladies as well, you spend hours submerging yourself into creating these artworks, and you only, for me, one of my philosophies, there's no mistakes, only surprises. So if you have something that happens on the artwork, you actually alter the artwork to incorporate that surprise. I do mostly pastels, as I said. The work behind me is a pastel, which is a once-off work. We call it a unique work, where if it sells, that's it, it's gone, and I can't reproduce it. And that's what I love about printmaking, is the print form allows you, if you have a work that you really, really like, that you can print the edition and keep one for yourself if need be. And that's, for me, the beauty of printmaking, is that you can actually have this incredibly beautiful work that 10 images can go out and you can keep one and save it for your stock, or for generations to come. My techniques are ancient techniques. I use the relief printing, which is what my liner cuts. Liner cuts is a relatively new medium, but the technique is the same. It's relief printing, invented in China with the cherry wood. And the etchings of, as I say, it's over 600 years old now. And I don't compromise. I absolutely love those techniques. And I have some of the largest etching presses in the country, so you're welcome to come to the studio.
Before opening up the talk to the audience, this is the key thing now, we can go to you to have conversations with the artists. I just want to conclude with one set of remarks, a brief one. No matter how rigorous John's approach is, he acknowledges the inescapability of the experiment. So, it is the experimental that counts more. the benign accident, as I say, the silence between the notes, the rupture at the heart of things. For what is vital, moving forward, is a way of making space for what has been silenced, fenced in, or forgotten to grow again. It's in this spirit that I understand the tenderness and the vision of these three artists and the other works that are actually represented here today. But I now would like to open the conversation to the floor. Please find out what you wish. Is there anything, Rich?
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. Kari, this is for you. So you curated this show. What was the inspiration for remodeling?
Thank you for that question. Actually, during the course of last year, I had the privilege of seeing John's works at UJ. And I found that when I'm curating a show, it starts very much like making artwork. There's a little spark, and then you just follow it and see what is attracted to that. It's like following a string or unraveling a ball of string or something, but it starts with something and then you just follow it. So it started actually with that spark of seeing your work. And then I had been looking at Mzili's work online for a really long time and had really been admiring your use of color, and I think the energy and the contagion that is both in your personality and in your work, comes through both ways. And then bringing John Moore into it, and we've worked with John Moore for a number of years now. And I must say, the more you see John's work and the more you live with it, the more you just completely fall in love with it. And it is narrative, and we tend to be moving in a world that has very strong elements of abstraction in the art space right now. But John's works contain something that will just hold you if you allow yourself to live with them for time. They're beautiful. Then Ashraf introduced me to Paula Ante, whose beautiful works, they're the kelp pieces that are hanging that side. And those kelp pieces speak about how kelp in the ocean, when it is living in the ocean, what it provides, and as it goes through its life cycle and then lands up on the beach, provides something else. And it speaks to many areas of even one's personal life, where you go through something, you learn something, and eventually that becomes wisdom for somebody else. So that was that interesting concept. And then Ashraf also introduced us to Cassian Roberts' work, which are those incredible sculptures. You're going to see the three sculptures over there and the one sculpture in the front. And that strongly relates to the quote that you read that, there's the same connection between sand and salt and silicon and steel. And you're going to very strongly see that coming through in his work, and they are really fascinating pieces. Carrie Carter has been with us for some time, so these are these sculptural pieces here. So Carrie works with soil. They are not fired pieces. She has developed her own techniques. She's investigated ancient building techniques to create actually just with soil. And those are different soils that she's working with to create an image. Those sculptures represent Mother Earth, and it's in gratitude really to Mother Earth that provides everything for us all to have this beautiful life. And then I think it's about how we respond back to that with gratitude and empathy. And I think also there was another thing that I really connected with in a world today where we're seeing really crazy stuff going on in terms of war and the world changing, where there are conversations about martyrs' rights and all kinds of interesting things that are starting to develop that speak of domination and dominating as a way or a conversation for the future. And this is in opposition to that, which I really like. So that was it.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Yeah.
I have a quick question for John. You spoke on your work. Sorry. Hi guys, it's Kat. You spoke on like your work, drawing narratives from like pre-human involvement. So like back to a time where animals and humans were like one. And you mentioned the story that you heard in your youth from the Khoisan. My question is, I wanted to know how much more like indigenous knowledge have you done research on within here in Africa, as you also stated that you're an African, like deeply. So I just wanted to understand, like, are there any more stories or any more research that you're doing to kind of cover like the indigenous knowledge and the indigenous stories that we had within South Africa in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. I look at a lot of indigenous mythology, and I also look at European mythology and try and, because I'm African but European, I try and find that magical thread of connectivity between both. And I also look at synchronicity. If there's something in my mind that is working, it means that there is, like an animal, it means that the animal in some way wants to come through and be put into this reality. It's a very personal thing, but what states a shaman, and the shaman is somebody who is a healer, is they have to die 3 times. And without going through much detail, I have died 3 times in my life. And the last time was when I was in a coma. And although I was in a coma for a specific amount of time, I actually needed my egocentric mind to get out of the way for the reality of the spiritual realm to actually talk to me. So while I was away, I actually had a full-blown conversation with specific beings in that reality. And that reality showed me a language to make my work. So when I talk about being a shaman and talking to animals, I actually have learned the language, and anyone can do it. It's not just up to me. I'm not putting myself on a pedestal. It's just you can look at a cactus and you can communicate with the cactus if you allow yourself to actually get to the energy of whatever that species is, and that's what they taught to me. Is that everything is universal, even a stone, even a brick, even a pavement or a computer. It has a resonance and you can actually communicate with it. Obviously my choice is to communicate with the environmental side. And often that leads to myth and mythology. So the giraffe etching is specifically talking about the rain creature. And that was a specific vision that came to mind. And then obviously through research I was able to understand, oh, this is what needs to happen. At this moment in time I'm researching the 3 fates and relating the 3 fates into specific animal forms. And what the fates, you know, the line of your birth, your life and your death. I'm looking at researching that. So I'm always looking at, one of the biggest questions is, what happens to all the Greek and Roman and Babylonian gods? They built temples to these beings that they believed were real, but now those realities, those gods no longer exist. So how were they so powerful? And then do they still maintain their dominance even though we don't worship them? It's a duality that I'm researching as to, you know, what happens to all the gods in 1,000 years' time. You know, have we created more gods, and why do humans have to worship a higher power? You know, what is it within us that we have to make a Venus organic female form? What is it about that we have to look at and revere? And you know, we can do that with a stone. If you want to revere something, we'll create something, but it has to be made by a man. Man has to do something to that object. And that's what I find so interesting, is what is it about man that we have to create these amazing temples? and spaces of religious or reverence. Let's not say religious, let's say reverence, where you step into a portal of a standing circle of stones, or a Gothic cathedral. Why can't we do that with an artwork? And that's why I refer to them as altarpieces and portals. When you sit long enough, something is going to happen, because that's what my energy is about.
I'd like to shift. Any questions? Which Leslie and Kiona? Because of course the sacred is in the natural world as well.
I've got a question for Kiona. Could you tell us a bit about the Anthropocene and how your work connects to that? Because I've heard you talk about it. I think that would be something really fantastic to share. Also about morphing bodies in your work, and if they're here, or if you've moved on from that.
Thank you, Sherry. She's actually one of my former classmates. So the Anthropocene actually comes in big time into the conversation that I'm trying to spark up. And Anthropocene is the era we're in now where the humans, we see ourselves as the most dominant effect over the whole world. And I wanted to dismantle that in my own right. In the sense that even though I am part of the Anthropocene, how can I start thinking beyond, or not just beyond, like between what my role is and what my relationship and entanglement with nature looks like. That I'm more than just in this industrial kind of setting, but I come from nature, you know, and I was really particularly interested in kind of how in the forms I create, they almost sit between looking like trees, but also feeling like other entities, like looking like human, wanting to be human. And I don't know what that want is. I just feel like there's this relationship humans and nature have, the synthetic and the human to be each other, you know. And I wanted to play around with my imagination and kind of have them do a dance. So in my work, you will see a few figures trying to be more than human, and trees trying to be more than trees. And yeah, I hope that answers your question. That's all.
So I have a question for Kunzile. Is there ever a time where when you are creating your artwork and materials being used, like your collages and paper, has there ever been a time where you feel stuck in not knowing where it should be positioned and if it will reflect the right expression that you want from it?
Well, I'm, doing my magic. The whole point is trying not to control, because my point was to let it come out of me and let it be created somehow. So yes, I cut fabric and paper, and sometimes I would think that this piece will fit nicely, and only to find that it doesn't. But I try not to control, so I just put it aside and it just continue. Because if I stay too long on that, then I start thinking, how can I fit it in? And automatically the magic is going there. So for me to stay in that moment is put it aside and move on. Try not to stay too long on it. And if I feel like it's getting to that point, either I have to move away, distract myself, just my mind, and then come back and try and see it with different eyes or fresh eyes, and maybe see if I can still go back to that point. If I can't go back, then I'm moving on. Yeah. Thank you. One more question.
Yes, please. Okay, John, this one's for you. I've got one. Where's it? Yeah. Okay, so John, those were very serious intellectual concepts that you were talking about.
Yeah.
But my appeal with your work is in the innocence, in the personality, in the joyfulness. There's a playfulness about your work which you haven't spoken about. I feel as a human that's what I love. And it's quite like my connection is that intention.
Absolutely. So I always, being has studied art history for so long, I always look at key aspects of what artists have created, and or I look at what artists have done. Matisse went through 2 world wars, and you saw the atrocity of those wars, and not once did those atrocities ever affect his work. His work is always joyful, full of color, and about beauty and joy. And I could make work talking about the atrocities that are happening in the animal world. We can talk about extinction, all that, but it's the choice of how do you want to talk about it. And I always look at the positive, the joy, the happiness of the moment. And yes, there's definitely positive energy and innocence in my work, and of course it's completely intentional as well. And yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to finish off unless there's any more questions. John, can I ask you to just quickly share the 2 demonstrations that you're going to be doing in the gallery?
Sure. We'll be doing a lino cut and etching demonstration. The first one is going to be this following Saturday, and then we've got the Easter break, and then the Saturday after Easter there's another demonstration. But is that good enough? But I've got my little baby Grace. She's over 120 years old. She's revered. She's gone all over the country with me. And I'll be using that little press to demonstrate both techniques. One day is going to be etching, and one day is going to be lino cuts. But you're welcome to bring and come through, and it's very intense. And we're going to get lots of. I will be demonstrating. You will be just observing.
So that'll be from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock on the 14th of April, and next week the 28th. So please feel free to join us, but let us know if you are coming. And just before we wrap up, I would like to introduce 2 of my new team members to everybody, which is Nomfantlo Mahangu on gallery management, and Lindsay Samuels, who has joined us from Cape Town as our consultant. And thanks ladies, like we showed together, we've done a great job.
Awesome.
And that's it. Thanks everybody. Please feel free to touch the artists and to hear more about the work.